Have you ever had someone smile at you, say your name with complete confidence, and then your mind goes completely blank when it's your turn? You know their face. You know you've met them before. You might even remember exactly where you met, but their name? Gone. Here's the surprising part. Forgetting someone's name doesn't automatically mean you have a bad memory. In fact, psychologists have long known that the brain often prioritizes faces over names because they are processed very differently. That's why even intelligent, highly successful people can struggle with names. But what if this keeps happening? What if you're forgetting names at work, at networking events, or even among people you've met several times? Is your brain warning you about something? Or is it simply doing exactly what it evolved to do? Most people assume the answer is obvious. It isn't. Because the real reason names disappear from your memory has far less to do with intelligence than you've probably been told. And once you understand what's actually happening inside your brain, you'll never think about memory the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your brain forgets names so easily, what that reveals about your attention and personality, and practical ways to improve name recall without relying on having a better memory. Because the biggest mistake isn't forgetting names. It's misunderstanding why you forgot them in the first place. And that's where the real story begins. Most people believe forgetting names means one thing. I just have a terrible memory. It sounds logical. If you remember birthdays, movie quotes, and random facts from 10 years ago, but can't remember the name of the person you spoke with yesterday, it feels like your memory must be broken. But cognitive psychology paints a much more interesting picture. Your memory isn't one giant storage box. It's a collection of different systems that each specialize in different kinds of information. Think of your brain like an enormous company. One department recognizes faces, another processes language, another tracks locations, another stores emotional experiences. Remembering someone's name requires several of those departments to work together in just a few seconds. If even one step is weak, the chain breaks. Imagine meeting someone at a busy conference. You shake hands. You're thinking about making a good impression. Music is playing. People are talking nearby. Your brain is deciding whether this person seems trustworthy, interesting, confident, funny, or threatening. While all of that is happening, their name appears for less than 2 seconds. Then it's gone. Your brain never had a chance to fully encode it. Notice what happened. The problem wasn't forgetting. The problem was never fully remembering in the first place. That's an important distinction. Neuroscientists describe memory formation as a process called encoding. Before information can be stored, your brain has to pay enough attention to it. Attention comes first. Memory comes second. Without attention, memory has very little to work with. This explains why you can remember every detail of an emotional conversation, but forget the person's name moments later. Your brain decided one piece of information mattered more than another. And from an evolutionary perspective, that makes perfect sense. For most of human history, recognizing someone's face was far more important than remembering the specific sound attached to them. Faces communicate emotion. They reveal intentions. They help identify friend from stranger. Names, by comparison, are arbitrary labels. Your brain has to create an entirely new association between a face and an unfamiliar word. That takes effort. This is also why unusual names can sometimes be harder, or easier, to remember. If a name has no meaningful connection in your existing memory, your brain has nothing to attach it to. On the other hand, if it reminds you of someone you already know, a familiar place, or even a favorite movie character, recall becomes much easier. Psychologists sometimes describe memory as a network rather than a filing cabinet. Every new piece of information needs connections. The more meaningful connections you create, the stronger the memory becomes. Without those connections, information fades surprisingly quickly. But there's another misunderstanding that quietly affects millions of people. Some believe forgetting names reveals something about their personality. If I cared more, I'd remember. If I were more social, I'd remember. If I were smarter, I'd remember. Research doesn't support such simple conclusions. Many factors can influence name recall, including stress, divided attention, sleep quality, mental workload, and how the information was encoded. Some personality traits may shape social behavior. For example, people who are naturally curious may ask more follow-up questions, creating additional memory cues. But personality alone doesn't determine whether you'll remember names. Context matters. Your level of attention matters. Your mental state matters. Picture 2 different situations. In the first, You're rushing into a meeting while checking your phone. Someone introduces themselves. Seconds later, you've forgotten their name. In the second, you're relaxed at a dinner with close friends. You repeat the person's name naturally during conversation. You connect it to something memorable. Days later, you still remember it. Same brain, different conditions. That's the hidden truth. The issue often isn't your memory capacity. It's how your brain decided to allocate its limited attention in that moment. And once you understand that, a much bigger question appears. If attention is the real gatekeeper of memory, what is constantly stealing your attention before memories ever have a chance to form? And that's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Picture this happening inside your skull right now. Every second, your senses are flooding your brain with far more information than you could ever consciously process. The color of the walls around you, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, background sounds, tiny movements in your peripheral vision, even the position of your body in space. Your brain has one job before anything else: decide what deserves attention. Everything else gets filtered out. This isn't a flaw, it's a survival feature. If your brain tried to store every detail of every moment, you'd quickly become overwhelmed. Instead, it acts like an expert editor, constantly asking one question: is this important enough to keep? Now imagine someone reaches out their hand and says, "Hi, I'm Daniel." That name exists in your awareness for maybe 1 or 2 seconds. During those same seconds, your brain is also noticing facial expressions, tone of voice, clothing, posture, eye contact, surroundings, and whether you're expected to respond. It's an incredible juggling act. And sometimes, the name is the first thing to fall. Think of your attention like a flashlight in a dark room. Wherever the beam shines, your brain gathers information clearly. Everything outside that beam fades into the background. The problem is that modern life keeps grabbing the flashlight away from you. Notifications, stress, deadlines, conversations, internal worries, even thinking about what you're going to say next. Psychologists call this divided attention. Research consistently shows that when attention is split, memory formation becomes less effective. You're not necessarily forgetting more. You may simply be encoding less from the start. Have you ever nodded while someone introduced themselves, only to realize seconds later you didn't actually hear their name? That wasn't laziness. Your attention was somewhere else. Now picture another part of your brain stepping in, the working memory system. You can think of working memory as a mental notepad. It's where your brain briefly holds information while deciding what to do with it. But unlike a notebook, this mental workspace has limited capacity. Fill it with too much at once, and older information gets pushed aside. Suppose you're entering a networking event. You're wondering if you'll make a good impression. You're trying to remember your opening line. You're scanning the room. Someone introduces themselves. Working memory is already crowded. Their name arrives, and there's simply no room left to keep it active long enough for stronger memory systems to take over. The result? The conversation continues. The name quietly disappears. Now let's talk about one of the brain's most important memory structures, the hippocampus. The hippocampus plays a key role in forming new memories. Rather than acting like a storage vault, it's more like an organizer that helps link new experiences into lasting memories across the brain. Think of it as a librarian receiving thousands of new books every day. Each book needs a title, a location, a category, connections to other books. If everything arrives at once, the librarian can't organize it perfectly. Some books are shelved quickly, others take longer, and some never get filed as effectively as they could have. That's why repetition matters. Each time you hear and meaningfully use a person's name, you're strengthening those connections. The memory becomes easier to find the next time. Stress adds another layer. Have you noticed how your mind sometimes feels blank before a presentation or during an important interview? Stress doesn't erase your intelligence, but it can narrow your attention. In demanding situations, your brain often prioritizes immediate challenges over details that seem less urgent. If you're worried about saying the right thing, remembering a stranger's name may not receive the attention it needs. This isn't a sign that your brain is failing. It's a sign that it's trying to manage limited mental resources. Sleep also plays an important role. Scientists have found that sleep helps support memory consolidation, the process through which recently learned information becomes more stable over time. If you're constantly sleep deprived, your brain may have a harder time strengthening new memories, including names. The same applies to chronic mental overload. When every day feels like a non-stop stream of meetings, emails, and notifications, your brain spends much of its energy deciding what deserves priority. Names often lose that competition. Here's something else that surprises many people. People who seem amazing at remembering names usually aren't born with extraordinary memories. Often, they're using better strategies. They slow down. They pay attention. They repeat the name naturally. They connect it to something meaningful. The difference isn't always capacity. It's process. And that's encouraging, because processes can change. Habits can change. Attention can improve. Your brain remains adaptable throughout life. A quality neuroscientists often describe as neuroplasticity. While it's not magic and doesn't happen overnight, practice can strengthen skills, including memory strategies. So if your brain sometimes feels wired against remembering names, it may simply be responding exactly as human brains have evolved to respond. The encouraging news is that once you understand these patterns, you can work with your brain instead of against it. And that raises the most important question of all. If forgetting names isn't simply a bad memory, what practical steps actually make remembering them easier? The answer is simpler and more powerful than most people realize. Here's the twist. The people who seem unforgettable in every room, the ones who greet others by name months later, usually aren't relying on extraordinary memories. More often, they're using simple habits that work with the brain instead of fighting against it. The goal isn't to force your brain to remember more. The goal is to make the information easier for your brain to keep. Let's look at 5 practical strategies supported by what we know about attention and memory. Slow down for the first 5 seconds. Most introductions happen while your mind is racing. You're thinking about what to say next. You're wondering how you're being perceived. Meanwhile, the other person's name slips by almost unnoticed. Instead, make the first few seconds count. When someone says, "Hi, I'm Sarah," pause for a moment before responding. Focus on hearing the name clearly. This tiny shift tells your brain, pay attention. This matters. That brief moment of intentional attention gives the name a better chance of being encoded into memory. It may feel insignificant, but memory often begins with just a few seconds of focused awareness. Repeat the name naturally. One of the simplest techniques is also one of the most effective. Use the person's name naturally during the conversation. For example, "Nice to meet you, Sarah." Later, you might say, "That's an interesting point, Sarah." The key word is naturally. Repeating a name over and over can sound forced or uncomfortable, but using it once or twice in a genuine way gives your brain additional opportunities to strengthen the memory. Each repetition acts like another layer of reinforcement. Instead of hearing the name only once, your brain experiences it multiple times in meaningful contexts. Create a meaningful connection. Random information is difficult to remember. Connected information is much easier. Suppose you meet someone named Rose. You might briefly picture a rose flower. If you meet someone named Jordan, you might connect the name to a place, a familiar athlete, or someone you already know. The exact connection doesn't matter. What matters is that your brain now has another pathway leading back to that name. Think of memory like a web. The more threads attached to a piece of information, the easier it becomes to find later. Be fully present. This may be the most overlooked strategy of all. Many of us enter conversations physically present but mentally somewhere else. We're replaying yesterday, planning tomorrow, checking our phones, thinking about our response before the other person has even finished speaking. Real attention is becoming rare, and because it's rare, it's valuable. When you give someone your complete attention for even a minute, 2 things happen. First, you're more likely to remember them. Second, they're more likely to feel remembered, even before you recall their name. People notice genuine attention. It strengthens relationships in ways that go far beyond memory. Don't fear forgetting. Here's something surprising. The anxiety of forgetting names can actually make remembering them harder. Imagine walking into a room thinking, "I always forget names." That belief creates pressure. Pressure increases self-consciousness, and self-consciousness competes for your attention. Instead of listening carefully, part of your mind is busy worrying about making a mistake. Try replacing that thought with something more accurate. If I pay attention and use good strategies, I'm more likely to remember. This isn't blind optimism. It's a practical shift in focus. You're directing your energy toward the process rather than the fear. Now imagine applying these habits consistently. You meet a new coworker. You pause. You hear the name clearly. You repeat it naturally. You connect it to something meaningful. You stay engaged in the conversation. The next morning, you see them again. This time, the name comes back. Not because your brain suddenly became perfect, but because you gave it the conditions it needed to succeed. These techniques won't guarantee you'll remember every name. No one's memory works perfectly all the time, but they can significantly improve your chances by helping your brain encode information more effectively. And perhaps the biggest benefit isn't just remembering names. It's becoming a more attentive listener, a more engaged communicator, a person who makes others feel seen. But even these strategies point to something deeper, because remembering names isn't really about memory alone. It's about how you move through the world. And that's the final piece most people never hear about. Let's go back to where we started. You meet someone. You recognize their face. Their name escapes you. For years, you may have interpreted that moment as evidence that something was wrong with your memory. But now you know a different story. Your brain isn't a machine designed to record everything. It's a system built to prioritize. It constantly decides what deserves attention, what forms meaningful connections, and what quietly fades into the background. Forgetting a name doesn't define your intelligence. It doesn't automatically reveal your personality. And it certainly doesn't mean you're incapable of improving. What matters is how you respond. Every conversation is an opportunity to train your attention. Every introduction is a chance to build stronger habits. Small actions, pausing, listening carefully, making connections, staying present, can gradually change the way you experience the people around you. Over time, those moments add up. Not only do you remember more names, you become someone who truly notices others. And in a world filled with constant distractions, that may be one of the most valuable skills you can develop. People rarely remember every word you say, but they often remember how you made them feel. When someone realizes you remembered their name, it sends a simple but powerful message. You mattered enough for me to pay attention. That isn't just good memory, it's meaningful human connection. So the next time you're introduced to someone new, don't rush through the moment. Pause. Listen. Be curious. Give your brain the chance to do what it does best when it's given the right conditions. You don't need a photographic memory. You don't need a genius-level IQ. You don't need to remember every single name perfectly. You simply need to become more intentional with your attention. Because attention is where memory begins. And memory is where stronger relationships often grow. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing for more evidence-based insights into psychology, neuroscience, and practical self-improvement. And before you leave, try this challenge today. The next time you meet someone new, use just one of the strategies you learned in this video. Notice how differently the conversation feels, and whether the name stays with you a little longer. You may be surprised by how much of a difference one small change can make. Thanks for watching. And remember this: the quality of your attention shapes the quality of your memories and the quality of your relationships.